Hi guys, my name is Emily. I saw that Melody had posted questions about loans, student loans specifically, and I started typing up what I knew, but then I realized probably making a video would be quicker and a little easier to explain everything. So what I understand from public loan forgiveness, which took many years because that is something that I wanted to do. I am a school counselor, so I work in a public school, specifically a tier 1. I don't know exactly what schools you have to work in, but every school that I've worked at has been a tier 1 school. So just to kind of explain it a little bit, so you have to work 10 years in a school, but more specifically, you have to make 120 payments. So for instance, I think when I first started in the school, I was in forbearance because I wasn't able to make payments until I was getting a check pretty regularly. And so those forbearance months don't count. But I talked to them about that, and they said, well, it just depends on how many months you worked and how many payments you worked. So we're just going to see how that works at the end. So maybe that first year doesn't really count. Also, there was some other issues because you have to make a certain kind of payment. So I know income-based repayments count, which is what I have, but also a standard payment counts, which for a little bit I was making something called a graduated payment, and graduated payments don't count. So every graduated payment that I made does not count toward the public service loan forgiveness, which I was like, oh, well, luckily I only did like a few months of the graduated payment, and then I switched to the income-based repayment, which does count because the standard is just way too expensive for me. It's like $700 a month, and that's just not something I can do. Whereas the income-based repayment now, I'm doing about $200 a month, maybe close to $300, which is a lot more manageable than $700. So also, not every loan counts for the public service loan forgiveness. So if you're like me, I started getting my loans in undergrad through a private company. It was Sallie Mae, and I'm no longer with Sallie Mae anymore. Not because I didn't choose to be, but I'll kind of get to why I changed in a second, because that kind of has to do with the public service loan forgiveness. So all of my loans through Sallie Mae ended up being indirect. So that doesn't count because it's only direct loans. But when I was in graduate school, I got all of my loans through the federal program, and so those are direct. So those counted. Luckily, that was most of my loans. So just to kind of give you an idea, I don't mind sharing. Well, and just know that the number is a little different now because of payments and interests. I started off with 60,000. I had 20 in undergrad, and then graduate I ended up having 40,000. So about 40,000 of it was direct and 20,000 of it was indirect. So my thought was, okay, well, let me at least get this 40,000 forgiven, and then I can figure out the 20,000. Well, finally, I figured out, somebody was like, oh, well, you can consolidate, and when you consolidate, then they can be considered direct. And I'm like, okay, wait, it's not that easy. So I ended up talking with a friend who knew a little bit more about it, and I said, well, what do you know about consolidating loans? She said, well, once you consolidate your loans, you start your 10-year countdown all over again. Well, I'm 3 years in, so no, I don't want to start that all over again. I don't want my 3 years of work to go in vain, so I wouldn't consolidate. Finally, one time I called, because I often hate using the computer, so anytime I have to do something and their system isn't very friendly, I would call. And finally this lady was like, well, you don't have to consolidate all of your loans. You can only consolidate the ones that are indirect, and then those turn into direct. And of course, those would start there, but they've never had a countdown on them. So I finally did that in February, about 2 years ago. So now all of my loans are direct. And so when you do that, you have to choose a loan company. And so I decided to go with Fed Loan Servicing because that's the company that the public loan service loan forgiveness is going through. Okay. So now all of my loans are with Fed Loan Servicing. They're all direct now. I think, well, now, so that was a couple years ago. So I think about 40,000 of it will be forgiven, or at least 2/3 of it will be forgiven in about 4 or 5 years. I forget exactly where the countdown is. But like I said, that first year might not count. But at that point, it's like, so what if I add another year? Because it's, I still have 8 more years to go on my other loan. So I'm almost at the 2-year mark in February. So that is what I understand. I had a friend who recently posted a video, and I didn't look at it, about how it's really hard to get the public service loan forgiveness if you work in a school. So I guess we'll have to see that when I come up to it. As far as questions about income-based repayments and standard payments, income-based repayments you have to apply for every year. So it's actually almost time for me to reapply for my income-based repayment, and that's how you keep the low repayment every year, is they look at your taxes from the year before, and they figure it out what your monthly payment would be based on that. Standard is usually like the standard payment. If you pay 10 years, you got to pay this much to pay it all off. It's usually pretty high. So yeah, it's hard in my opinion to do standard, but yeah. So I feel like that's pretty much what I know. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert, and I'm not sure how much of this is misdirected. It's just what I understand from my many calls to more Navient than Sallie Mae, because I started off with Sallie Mae, and Sallie Mae sold my loan to Navient. And so Navient did a really great job, I felt like, educating me, because I kind of felt like I was in the dark. It was just it's very frustrating, the whole process. So unfortunately, I feel like most people our age that are college educated are in a very similar boat, and hopefully maybe relief will eventually be here for us. But luckily, I'm not letting it bring me down. But anyway, if you guys want me to elaborate a little more about any of that, I definitely can, or at least with what I know. Maybe if you have more questions about income-based repayment, I can answer what I can, about consolidating part of your loan. And to be honest, I haven't done any of the paperwork needed, because every year you do have to get your employee to fill out that you indeed were an employee for that year. And so I haven't done any of that. I think this summer I'm going to try to do it, because I do have to go back to every school that I worked at and get them to sign it. But yeah, so just let me know if you have any questions. I'll try my best, but I thought this was probably the best way to do it. Okay, thank you.